not at all obvious that transparency will lead to accountability. If anything, transparency will initially lead to exploitation by sophisticated actors who know what to do with the information that transparency is revealing and can exploit it and create arbitrage opportunities.
Today I talked to Sheila Warren, head of Blockchain and DLT at the World Economic Forum on the Speaking of Crypto podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Grinnell.
Want to learn more and be inspired by crypto's frontrunners who are out on the leading edge of this technology? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to Speaking of Crypto with your host, Shannon Grinnell.
Sheila Warren, head of Blockchain and DLT at the World Economic Forum, talks about blockchain policy and some exciting projects in the social impact space. This is episode 84 for the Speaking of Crypto podcast, the sixth episode in our Women in Crypto Wednesday series. We talk about China's central bank digital currency, the Libra Association's governance structure, Apple Pay getting into crypto, blockchain in the environment, rethinking resources and accountability, transparency leading to exploitation before accountability, and the inherent inclusivity of the blockchain ecosystem, and much, much more. We have a great conversation. I'm so happy I was able to chat with Sheila for the podcast. So here's Sheila Warren. But before we get started, please check out our affiliate links at speakingofcrypto.com/earncrypto for some great ways to support the show. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please take a minute to rate, review, and subscribe. This really does go a long way to helping people who are new to crypto find the show. And to all of you listening, thank you for helping to make this podcast happen. Wonderful, Sheila. Well, I'm really excited to chat with you today. And I thought maybe before we get started, I was going to ask you about your role at WEF, but maybe to start, could you explain what the WEF is exactly and what its mission is?
Sure. So the World Economic Forum is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. And our mission is to improve the state of the world. And so I think we're best known for our annual meeting in January in Davos of every year that brings together world leaders and business leaders and leading academics to really, there's a theme every year, and we talk about how we can actually make the world a better place. And there's a lot of other meetings and things that happen there. Where I work is the office in San Francisco of the forum, and it's called the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So this is quite different from the rest of the forum and what we're best known for, in that we are a technology policy shop. So we focus exclusively in this office on technology policy, specifically in four different areas: blockchain and DLT, AI, IoT, and data policy. And we think a lot about how these technologies intersect, and we have projects that are basically piloting policy interventions that can support and enhance the social benefit of these technologies.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, really interesting. And, just starting with the World Economic Forum's mission in general, I was also wondering, how would you say it's different from the United Nations, which has a similar mandate?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, we are less of a non-governmental organization. We are an international organization like the UN. I think our mandate is different because I think we are not prescribed to engage in any specific area. And so we think of ourselves as somewhat akin to the UN, except that our goals are not just primarily in terms of political and health and food, kinds of areas. We actually also look at business. Mm-hmm. So we do examine these technologies. For example, just to speak to the lens of the center, we do examine these technologies in their enterprise or business context as well. So we pull together and weave those strands across the world. And I think another thing about us is that we are very multi-stakeholder in our intention and in the creation, the co-design of our projects. So it's very important to us to have business voices and civil society and government, public sector, third sector, all in the same co-design room and process, so that we can make sure that solutions that we are proposing are actually going to meet the needs of those various constituencies.
Yeah, it sounds like a really valuable component. And Sheila, can you explain what your role is specifically?
Yes, I'm the head of blockchain and DLT here at the center. And so what my team and I do is basically create and craft policy interventions that we think are addressing gaps in governance. So whether that's something like our blockchain for supply chain project, which is looking at how you build ecosystem-wide deployments and what kinds of policies need to support those deployments. So these involve components of data, privacy, security, digitization in certain fashions, these kinds of things, or whether it's our central banks project that has brought together 45 central banks with various blockchain experts and ministers of finance and others to really explore and examine opportunities for CBDC. These are kind of two examples of the work that we do. We try to make sure we're not doing anything redundant with other entities and other bodies that are doing policy intervention. And we also do not focus on technical POC. So we're not trying to necessarily advance or push protocol itself and that level forward. We're looking for policies that can support protocol and that can enhance adoption throughout the entire world.
Really interesting. So, it's very interesting what's coming out of China, where this central bank digital currency may actually arrive sooner than we were expecting, I think. What are your thoughts around that and what you are looking at specifically?
Yeah, it's not surprising for one thing I'll say. It's just a matter of time. We have found as a general rule that the most exciting experimentation is really happening in let's call them frontier economies, sort of high growth economies that don't necessarily have the potential to destabilize the world economy if they suddenly switch into a different kind of currency function. And so I think, I think we were slightly surprised to see China be the first mover because Cambodia, for example, has been talking about this for quite a while. And in really actually exciting innovation, they want to kind of push out and move into production a number of different use cases and test cases for their CBDC. But then again, China is often the large player in the room, so it's not altogether surprising. And I think this is what's going to be really interesting is to see how the global financial system reacts to this news and to see kind of the speed or agility with which there's some sort of adaptation of existing processes to the new reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And then do you have any, really discussions around what's happening with Facebook's Libra project?
Yeah, I'm for one am positive on the project. My view is that anything that draws attention to this space is exciting, and it leads to the more mainstreaming of this technology, and it's not seen as this kind of scary, cutting edge kind of dubious,
yeah.
thing. And so, yeah. And I don't know if you saw the announcement yesterday that in advance, leading up to the iPhone announcement, Apple actually also noted that they were paying attention to this space.
Yes.
I think it was the VP of Apple Pay noted that she was paying attention to this space very closely. And so the sort of validation of these companies, I think in and of itself is a good thing. Now, that aside, right, there's obviously that blessing and grace function that they can provide, these big companies can provide. That aside, look, I think we have to see if the Libra Association lives up to the governance that its documents suggest. And are we going to, what is going to be in that basket of currencies that's used, right, as the peg? And how are we going to think about the governance around this group of 100 organizations? Which 100 are they going to be? And what if somebody wants to leave? And all these kinds of questions I think they're struggling with. And these are the critical questions around how you think about a governance structure that can truly be in the public interest and truly be inclusive. These are not easy questions. So I commend Facebook for tackling this. I think that they have, nobody's perfect, but I think they've certainly gone about this in a way that feels quite thoughtful and sincere. And so I guess it remains to us to see what happens and probably most importantly, how the regulators are going to continue to respond to this. And what they're going to say is what they're actually going to do. I think it's going to be quite telling.
Right. And when you have these questions, you've been talking about governance quite a bit, even just in our conversation. It's such a huge rabbit hole that we can all start to go down. What then happens once you start asking these questions and, discussing where you think things might go? Is there anything that you recommendations or reports that then you come up with?
So we do some of that. I think, just looking at our publications, the first big kind of viral piece that we published was in April, I believe, of 2018. And that's in part, it's called Blockchain Beyond the Hype. And that's in part because Davos that year was just crypto crazy. It was bananas.
Right.
So you couldn't walk like a foot without getting accosted by a sign in your face. It was like crypto haven, or it was every kind of name you could think of, right? And the press was going nuts, and it was just this real jungle.
It was the new buzzword, really, at that time, I guess.
It really, well, it was kind of, I mean, Bitcoin had really risen meteorically and people were getting excited about it for a variety of different reasons. It was attracting a lot of attention for, some reasons that were good, some reasons that were maybe not as good. But I felt it was very important for us to cut through some of that. And I felt that we were one of the few bodies that could have the credibility and presence to issue a cautionary note that was, I consider myself a pragmatic optimist when it comes to this technology. And I think our paper was that. So we certainly talked about the long-term potential and that we remain very bullish on the technology, which I think has proven fair. But we also said that a lot of this was nonsense, and we cautioned, very diplomatically against the ICO craze and the warnings that the technology was simply not fit for purpose for some of the things it's being touted as being perfect for. And so I think that kind of laid the tone of our engagement with this space more effectively than I could even have imagined.
Amazing.
And that's going on. We're really always trying to provide objective analysis of what's happening. Because the reality is if the technology succeeds or fails, the center is going to be here. I mean, we look at other technologies, we look at these technologies in conjunction with others and not just in isolation. And we're not invested in this space, in any meaningful way. So to a large extent, I think that the voice that we have and the role we play is to serve as a little bit of a dampening function at times, but also to encourage. I think there was once the hype bubble kind of burst, there was this giant overcorrection, in my opinion. People just kind of fled and didn't want to have anything to do with it. And, you saw people kind of downsizing and departments focusing on blockchain or taking their blockchain work into like the secret lab, they didn't want to talk about it anymore. And that's also not reasonable, So we're trying to kind of encourage companies to say, you need to be paying attention to this. If you're not, you're missing out. That's not the right approach. You can't bury your head in the sand. But let's also be realistic about what it means to engage in technology transformation. That is not an easy process, as anyone who's done it knows.
Absolutely. So yours, I guess, position is that blockchain is here to stay. It will succeed. And I did hear you talk about how decentralization can lead to democratization. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that's, when you think about this from an enterprise, yes, exactly what you said. It's coming. You can be ready for it or not. That's your decision. If you're not ready, I mean, it's not because you haven't been aware, So like, it definitely is. This is coming, and in many cases, it's here. So absolutely. Now, when it comes to some of the sort of more philosophical kinds of civic tech, let's call it work, which is frankly what gets my blood going, what I really look for. I think there's a lot of potential here for things like financial inclusion, and you hear about a lot of talk about this. It's not easy to get there, though. It's really hard to think about taking an unbanked population, just as a kind of classic example, and moving them onto a system, even if it's something that doesn't require their engagement with traditional banks. Like, that's still a really big deal, and it's something that people working in development aid know very well. So I think there is, to some extent, a little bit of naivete about the potential of the technology versus the reality of deployment in some spaces where this truly does have a lot of theoretical potential. Now, my opinion is that when you think about decentralization and what that means, it's opportunity. It's the ability to potentially shift power dynamics and power structures, and to empower parts of society that have not traditionally had access to things like reserve capital or to the ability to create inherited wealth, for example. This is an example. Or even to be counted and seen, right? Even to be counted and seen for things like government services. So a lot of these kinds of functions are at heart about re-democratizing, or in terms of the first principle, just democratizing systems that purport to be widely available to every resident or citizen, but in reality are not. And I find that to be some of the most exciting potential when we think about what the technology could potentially do.
Yeah, it is really exciting. I mean, Libra is talking about how they might be able to potentially unbank the unbanked just with the user base that they have. And I've spoken to, a couple people, including Galia Benartse from Bancor, who was doing a pilot project, a couple of pilot projects where they were giving tokens into different communities just to see how that it could be used in those kind of circumstances. Are there any projects that you are excited about that you see are helping, I guess, on the, blockchain for social good area?
I think there are any number, and some of them I think are things people don't think about. There's a lot of focus on how are we getting, new financial systems of inclusion. I think that's very important. Stella's doing great work in this space. I think BitPesa is really exciting. It's a little more indirect, but the creation of capital markets in Africa is really exciting for what that can do on that continent. So things like that. Excuse me. But I also think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the environment space. I do think that some of the energy opportunities people are looking at, whether it's BitLumens or Power Ledger, I think there's a lot of opportunities to rethink how we structure the deployment of natural resources in our society and the accountability we can provide around the use of those resources. To me, that may not be as direct as giving access to banking type or banking equivalent services, but it's something that can benefit the entire planet. And when you think about where resources like solar, for example, are situated, you can kind of see that there is an opportunity there to create unlock this gigantic economic opportunity for parts of the world that heretofore have not necessarily owned, a significant industry in a way that's globally market making.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've seen some wearable solar, I guess they're like blankets, where you could be able to generate some power that way. But if there's access to individuals or villages, let's say, I talked to someone who's the CEO of Solera, who talks about their project where they're trying to put the solar energy tokens essentially on a blockchain and help distribute that as well. So it does sound like a really exciting, project that way. Are there other ways that you could, I guess, help the environment using blockchain technology?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus on solar and on energy grid, but I think there's also applicability to water resources. I think there's applicability to agriculture, how you actually think about water deployment in agriculture, how you think about soil. I think there's national parks preservation opportunities that are being explored and being looked at. So I really think when you think, and not to mention traceability, right? So illegal fishing, there's a lot of work happening there in the ocean. There's a lot of different kinds of startups and other groups that are examining how we can actually track resources in a way that creates a more robust life cycle. So we enhance renewables, we enhance the circular economy, and we're able to kind of upcycle parts that were in the past were very difficult to track, which you could now imagine doing, right? So all kinds of batteries, there's all kinds of things, I think, that could benefit the planet that are critically important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you've also talked about it's important to look at biases when you're developing new technology. What kind of biases are you uncovering as, this ecosystem is being developed and, as it grows?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my biggest caution points or concerns about any new technology for that matter, whether it's AI, IoT, blockchain, DLT. You have to really think about not falling into these neo-colonial patterns of deployment. Mm-hmm. So building something that you're then throwing into a community that doesn't necessarily want it or understand what it is or what the need for it is, and creating interventions that are just not all the way thought through. And the example that I use a lot, and when I give talks, is really this example of something called the play pump, which was this very well-intentioned, frankly quite creative, very innovative design where you could pump water, have children who played on a merry-go-round, basically pump water for a village. And there were a lot of problems in deployment that made it absolutely futile. It just didn't work. And some of those problems could really have been thought through had the community been engaged in the design in a more meaningful way. So one thing I think about with Blockchain and DLT, because you are thinking about system transformation, I do worry that some communities are not part of that conversation and will get lost. So we are doing a deployment in Colombia, in the country of Colombia, and it is designed, it's focusing on public procurement and the attempt to reduce corruption. The theory of the project is that blockchain technology can lead to more transparency, and transparency, if positioned correctly, can lead to accountability. But that in there is the key, right? Because I think, I always say it's not at all obvious that transparency will lead to accountability. If anything, transparency will initially lead to exploitation by sophisticated actors who know what to do with the information that transparency is revealing and can exploit it and create arbitrage opportunities. So how do we create a policy environment that makes that exploitation less likely or ideally impossible? And how do we empower the citizens who can gain access to new information to hold government actors or businesses or others truly accountable. What does that mean? What education is necessary to enable them to access the system, understand what they're seeing, to analyze and synthesize what they're seeing, and then what are the systems of retribution so they can actually seek redress if they have in fact been wronged as a community or as individuals. And those things are the things I think people don't think about. They think about, well, this solution is going to make it so that everyone can have access to everything. Won't that be wonderful? Well, in theory, right? But in reality, that's not what always happens,
Yeah, I
so
think you're making some.
I think is important.
Yeah, you're just making some, incredible points here. And I did hear you speak about the merry-go-round, the pump project. And I think what the end result was that it was going to take something like 27 hours of pumping in order for there to be, a very small amount of water or energy that was created. And so it just water, I guess, was the result. People are very worried about putting their own financial information on a blockchain. What about starting with governments putting their information on a like their financial, where we can actually track how many taxes were collected, what that worth is, and then where it funnels down to. And there are things that you can do with blockchain technology, like zero knowledge proofs, where you could protect, whether it's identification or, specifics in certain places, so that things that we needed to be transparent could be, and, you can hide other things. I guess you're dealing with a lot of those things in terms of questions around the governance of various blockchains. Is that right?
Very much so. And I think the important thing to realize, and I think we did see some of this in the congressional hearings around Libra, right? To be fair to all those asking the questioners, is that, there are some powerful players who are not interested in, in things being tracked, right? Like for reasons, because that's not in their self-interest. And so how do you create a governance structure that guards against that happening? And by guards, I mean, makes it impossible. And this is something lawyers have wrestled with for forever. I mean, I'm a lawyer by training, and I can tell you, human ingenuity around corruption is, people are never more inventive than when there's some way to kind of get away with it, right? And there are certainly ways to exploit all of these technologies. In AI, we know it's just limited to the algorithm. It's not that hard to manipulate an algorithm if you're the person that has the data input, and you're kind of responsible for that. So how do you make sure that what you're actually tracking is something that is the right thing, and it's a meaningful thing, and it's something to which it creates metrics that create accountability, and that there is a set process or procedure that's accessible to create the redress that is warranted. And, again, it's about, when we talk about system transformation, it's not just, okay, now our systems run on this different technology. It's the processes, even the philosophy around a lot of these systems needs to also adapt and change to accommodate the new opportunities. Otherwise, all we're doing is making it a little bit faster, potentially, which, I mean, that's great. Don't get me wrong. Efficiency is great, but it's not the whole enchilada. There's a lot more we could actually be doing if we are willing to go in and interrogate these sort of, in many cases, antiquated systems and processes that are not serving the bulk of the population best.
Yeah. Wow. Just listening to you, it really does sound like we're in very early days, and that there's so much more ground to cover. Do you feel that way?
I do feel that way. I still think this is I wouldn't call it nascent anymore. I don't think that's entirely fair, but I definitely feel like there's so much further to go. I mean, we have just begun to tap into what this could potentially do. And I do think we're seeing, what I really appreciate is, I'm on this thing called, the governor here in California the assembly created this working group in California that's going to be examining what are opportunities with technology around government services and things like that. So I think we are seeing a renewed openness by some of the major economic players in the world to this technology and what it could do, and whether or not the implementation there is possible, given budget constraints, other political realities and things like that is the next question. But I do think that there is a slow transition into understanding that this is a positive if it's done correctly, which I'm happy to see.
Yeah, it sounds really optimistic. Sheila, I wanted to ask you what it means to be a woman in crypto or a woman in blockchain.
Yeah, I actually find this space to be, Well, let's back up. So tech in general is not known for its gender diversity or diversity as a matter of course. And I think we all just kind of acknowledge that reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
I actually do find that blockchain and DLT is a little bit more open to diverse points of view. And I think part of that is just the origin story of this technology and kind of the kinds of people that were initially engaged in this were of a very similar, cut, if you will, to people that kind of started the internet. It was the next generation of those kinds of guys. But I do think that the attributes of this technology attracted a lot of women early on into the space. The promises and potential for what it could hold, I do think were very appealing to women. And I will say, I do feel like there was an openness, especially in the kind of product side and the policy space, to women. So I feel that I've made some of my best friends in this space who are women in this space who are, all busting their butts and working really hard to get this thing, get it traction, who I respect tremendously. And so I'm not going to in any way, downplay that we are part of the broader tech ecosystem, which is deeply, deeply problematic. But I do feel like some of that spirit of democracy, if you will, has infiltrated this particular space in a positive way. Not to say there are not, kind of contexts in certain conferences, for example, that, I will not attend, and I find very troubling some of the things that I hear. But I do feel like in the core of the community, there is this general sense that a diversity of viewpoints is critical to success of the ecosystem, not just a nice to have, but actually needs to be a feature. And people who understand that are not they're going to go out of their way to be inclusive. And I have found that attitude as well.
Oh, amazing. It's so optimistic. On the other side, as you said, it is a male-dominated, especially tech industry. Are there hurdles that you wanted to mention that you've maybe had to overcome?
I think I see this a little bit like law firm. I compare it to law firm life, So I began my career on Wall Street at a Wall Street law firm at a time when there were a handful of female partners in a very prominent, law firm. And you looked around and didn't have a lot of mentors or role models who were kind of succeeding in this space. Blockchain is early enough that I feel like success is yet to be defined. A lot of people who made a lot of money are kind of quiet about that for obvious reasons, right? Yeah. And so there isn't this same kind of flashiness, to this space. That being said, I do feel like when I'm on a panel, it's by definition not a manel. We here at the forum are very committed to gender diversity. So every year we actually run, or every other year I think it is, the forum actually runs a pay comparison to make sure they're not discriminating on the basis of gender or on pay. We do not put on all male panels. We just don't do it. We'd rather cancel the panel than have it be all reflective of one demographic. So that's very important to us. And that's true, not just of gender. That's important to us. I feel very fortunate that I have landed up in a workplace that really prizes, that kind of perspective. And I feel grateful that I've been able to avoid, some of the sort of pitfalls for people who have not been so fortunate. So that's kind of, I think, a comment I would make. And I would encourage, I always encourage women to just enter the space. I mean, I think there's a perception now that, there's this kind of old guard who knows everything and it's too late for me. That is just absolutely not true. I mean, this is a space that is so new and it's actually very open. So I encourage anybody with an interest in the space to just dive in, ask questions. There are a lot of novices. None of us are experts in everything. There's no way you could be. So it's still a space where you can differentiate yourself and carve out an area of expertise that will be very well received for the most part.
Oh, fantastic. Sheila, how has your educational background and your previous experience prepared you for the work you're doing today? You were sort of explaining your Wall Street experience. Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I think the most important thing I'd bring to the table with this role is the civic tech background. So I spent 10 years, I built a software platform that focused on international aid and reducing inefficiencies in international aid through streamlining diligence, right? It was a SaaS product. And then I became general counsel of this big social enterprise called TechSoup that operated in 200 countries and was thinking a lot about data localization, civil society, empowering civil society organizations with technology, thinking about the government and the public sector as well and their engagement with the third sector. So I think that perspective is so well suited, a civic tech perspective and a really inclusive development mindset and experience and process methodology, I think is the best thing that I bring to the table in terms of the blockchain ecosystem, because I think there are a lot of people who are trying to reinvent that wheel, and there's a tremendous amount of excellent both academic writing, but also just kind of how-to almost manuals on how you actually engage in inclusive technology builds. So to me, it was very eye-opening. Yeah, as a lawyer who's thought more about rules and laws, and you always live in the gray as a lawyer, but you're always aware of what the letter of the law states. Here, there is a letter of the law that is code, but there's so much flexibility around how you deploy that code in the context in which you do that. So I think, to me, that creativity that civic tech brings is the most important aspect from my past professional life that I'm bringing to bear here.
Yeah, I think the creativity and that really global perspective as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I'll say that I think is really important, at least in how I think of technology, is that I'm a parent. So I'm always thinking about the next generation, like what are their assumption spaces going to be? I have 3 daughters. How are they going to interact with technology? How is technology going to become a tool, not of exploitation of them, both as women, but also as individual citizens? How is it going to be a tool of empowerment? And so I think about that a lot because it's very visceral to me. It's very critical to me in my role as a mother. I'm thinking about the world I'm shaping for my daughters.
Amazing. I have 3 boys and a little daughter who's 3 years old. And I think I've become more of a feminist now that I have a daughter.
Yeah, right. Because you really start to think about your own experience and things you dealt with growing up and how it didn't have to be that way, but it was. And how to make it a better world.
Absolutely. How I want the world to be for her. Sheila, it's so great chatting with you. Is there anything else you wanted to add? I do have a couple of fun questions if you have a couple minutes.
I do. The only other thing I would add would just be to say, the other caution that I bring is I think viewing technology in isolation is very dangerous. We really have to consider technology in context. And if we're not doing it, the minute we start to abstract it out and make it too academic, I think we run the risk of falling into traps and traps that are going to be detrimental to society. So that's something else I think about all the time. But I'd love to do some fun questions.
Okay, that's great. So number 1 is, if you could swap jobs with anyone for a day, whose job would you want to try out?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think the only fair answer to that question is Beyonce. So I'm going to go with Beyonce. I think that's it. Beyonce. For sure.
That's funny. Awesome. Number 2, if you could ask Satoshi one question, what would it be?
I would love to get Satoshi's take on the current ecosystem. And that's kind of a broad question, but I really want to say, is this what you imagined? Did you think it would wind up being like this, where you'd have not just Bitcoin, but you'd have ETH, you'd have all these other kinds of things happening? Did you imagine this as being something that would get wider adoption earlier on? Did you see it as being niche? I just want to know a little more about the intentions and how it's played out.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard a couple of people say that when the white paper was created, that really the idea was more around cash or just using it as a currency. And now it's become this store of value. And so, there's another big question.
Fascinating to get a read, right? To say, and also, how do you feel about that? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Right?
Yeah.
What is your kind of emotional response to that? I'd love to know.
It's very interesting.
You created.
Cool. Number 3, what's the most challenging time in your career and how were you able to overcome it?
I think it was when I left my last law firm. I had always imagined that I would stay that course and be a partner and have a bunch of clients and go to court and all that kind of stuff. And when I left that behind to move into technology product development, it was a gigantic leap of faith. I trained to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 13, 14 years old. And suddenly I was moving into technology. But the need was so compelling. It was hard to, it's kind of like any startup founder, right? It's hard to stay the course and have the courage of my convictions. It was a very challenging time. But I think I overcame it, the second part of your question, because I was so committed to the outcome. I felt that it was truly important to divert some of this wasted money that was going to overhead and admin and really move it into project work and program work that could actually benefit people. And I felt very passionate about that, and I do to this day. So it helped me.
Oh, it's a beautiful life lesson just to be able to focus on what was important. Number 4, if you could sum up your life so far into one moment, like either an event or place and time in your life, what would it be?
Wow. It would have to be 3 moments, and that would be the birth of each of my daughters. And I think that, I came to each of their births as a different person. Like I had moved a lot personally. Becoming a mother in and of itself is obviously a giant transformation. So becoming a mother again and then again, you come at it from a different place. You're a different person each time. And I think the act of giving birth does transform you as a person and how you think about yourself, how you think about yourself relating to nature, how you think about yourself as a physical being. All of that changes a lot. And each of the births I was older, so thinking about myself and how I was aging and bringing new life into the world, like it was very, very transformative for me, each of those moments, and I couldn't possibly pick one of them.
Oh, yeah. That's great. Number 4, because this is such a crypto thing, but do you follow any special diet, meat only, keto, vegan?
Oh, that's hilarious. I would call it the parent diet, where I basically eat standing up whatever my kids did not eat. So I eat their bread crust, I eat their, half their quesadilla or whatever, their mac and cheese or whatever it was. Yeah, their half the apple core that they claim, like it's not even a core, but like the
leftovers.
Exactly, the parent diet. That's my diet. Does that count?
Oh, that's great. Oh, Sheila, it's been really great chatting with you. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, you too. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Speaking of Crypto with Shannon. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And for more great content and to stay up to date, visit speakingofcrypto.com and Facebook and Twitter at Speaking Crypto. We'll catch you next time.